Hello, welcome to my channel. You're watching What Helen Reads and I'm Helen, and today I am talking about villains who became heroes. I read a lot of dark romances, a lot of mafia romances, and we have a lot of villains in those stories. Often in every single book the hero appears to be a villain before we start but ends up not being as bad as we thought. What I wanted to do though today was actually pick out some books where we'd seen a character in previous stories who were villains or were, you know, the antagonists in some way, who they later go on in the series to have their own book and therefore essentially get their own redemption story, their redemption arc. So someone who we hated at first, who we end up loving in this story. So that's kind of what I wanted to do today. Now, as I started to put this list together, I realised there was quite a range of heroes, from some heroes who had not done an awful lot in order to be villainous, and so therefore didn't have this as big a sweeping arc or have as much to make up for. They didn't need to do as much grovelling, shall we say, in order to win us over. And there's definitely some heroes who I've listed in here who you may even think have not grovelled enough still and still have not really fully redeemed themselves, yet they ended up with their own HEA. And as we go through, I'll explain why I think they were kind of villains and what they've done to redeem themselves. And these are in no particular order, so we go from some very villainous characters to not so very villainous characters and all mixed in between. So the first one I want to recommend is God of Ruin by Rina Kent, and this is book 4 in the Legacy of the Gods series. It's a dark college sort of romance, but it's also kind of next generation mafia romance sort of series as well. In this particular one we're following Landon King, who is our villain, and Mia. So this world is kind of set, like I say, it's a next generational sort of mafia sort of romance. So they're the kids of previous heroes and heroines that we've seen in Rina Kent's kind of universe. And in this one, all of the kids are now at a university on Brighton Island, and there's 2 universities on Brighton Island. It's supposed to be an island off the coast of the UK. And one of the universities is sort of frequented by the American mafia kids, and the other one is frequented by kind of the billionaire UK kids. So Landon King is from the UK, so he's a British villainous hero, and Mia, who is our heroine in this one, she is a Russian mafia princess, so she is firmly in the Russian camp. Now Landon has been the antagonist in the whole of this series up to this book. And Landon is the identical twin brother of Brandon, who will get his book in book 5, so he's the next one to have a book, and also Glyndon, who had her book as book 1, and she is the other half to Kenyon from book 1. He's also head of the elites sort of club, so basically he's established this sort of fraternity, if you like, club at this university, and it's called the Elites. Now he is very, very much at war with the heathens, and that is headed up by Jeremy, who is part of the sort of the Russian mafia family, and so the Elites and the heathens basically are very much at kind of war with each other, if you like. So Landon in the previous books not only has been trying to split up the other couples, stop them getting together. He has been doing some horrible things to the heathens, including was responsible for setting part of their mansion on fire and putting some of the other characters in jeopardy. So we haven't really liked Landon in the other books. The other thing about Landon is that he is an absolute genius, but he's also a true psychopath. He lacks empathy or any kind of emotion. He doesn't experience guilt in any way, and he gets very, very, very bored quickly. He doesn't have any kind of he doesn't specifically have any violent tendencies. So although his character I felt was very similar to Killian's from book 1, because they're both true psychopaths, Kenyon had more this sort of like dark need to figure out how things worked and kind of like really kind of was holding back from actually committing some sort of murder. Whereas Landon has no real desire to kill anyone. He just has this sort of like black hole inside of him. He gets very, very bored very, very quickly, and he's always trying to cause trouble just to keep himself amused and to kind of feed the beast within, if you like. And his sights very much get trained on Mia. Now, we've sort of seen Mia here and there in some of the other books. She's also a twin, and she's twins with Maya, and she is Nicholas's sister, who like I say, is part of the Russian mafia, or will be, is like a Russian mafia heir. And Mia had a traumatic experience when she was a child, and as a result she is now mute, so she doesn't speak at all, but she communicates through American Sign Language. Now, Mia is extremely protective of her family and has not reacted too well to some of the things that Landon's been doing over the course of the previous books. So in this one, she decides that she's going to get her own back, and she's going to humiliate him in public. So the next time he has a party at the elite sort of club where he invites loads of people over, she arranges to make sure that when he's standing on stage giving his speech, that basically he gets covered in pig's blood, and she thinks that will get him back. Of course, all this does is means that Landon gets very much focused on Mia, and she gets sort of trapped in his sights. And when he sees her and starts to get to know her a bit better, at first he's has no interest in her as a person, but what strikes him is the fact that she has definitely piqued his interest. She starts to feel some of the blackness, the black void inside of him, and she also becomes his sort of muse. So he's a genius sculptor, and he's been sculpting all of these things, and everyone says that he's a genius, and the sculptures that he's making are absolutely amazing and fantastic. But he always thinks there's something missing. He doesn't feel like he's made a masterpiece yet. And yet when Mia is around him, he feels this overwhelming urge of creativity, and he feels that he's on the brink of creating his masterpiece. And so in order to harness that feeling of creativity, and for him to be able to produce his sculptures, he pretty much forces Mia to spend more time with him. Now, Mia obviously is resistant to this at first, but then she decides that it's a really good way to actually spy on him, to find out a bit more about him, so she can actually get the full revenge that she desires. But of course, as they start to spend more time together, they get to know each other, and this is where we really get to know Landon, understand a bit more about what makes him tick, and ultimately he gets his redemption arc because he realises that he needs Mia in his life, and he decides to turn over a new leaf, as it were. He basically agrees to a truce between the heathens and the elites, and he also seeks out the advice of his brother, who he's hoping will help him learn about empathy and emotions and showing emotions to people. So that's Landon King, and we end up understanding him a bit more and forgiving him for some of the bad things he's done in some of the other books. So the next villain turned hero that I want to talk about is Volos, and he's the hero from Shae's Bounty by Deysi O'Donnell, and this is book 4 in the Earth's Bounty series. It's an alien romance, this one, so a little bit different. Now, Volos is the known villain of the previous stories. So in this one, basically it's an alien abduction romances. We have some buddy aliens who go to Earth, beam up some women with the intention of selling them into sex slavery. There are kind of pleasure planets across the galaxy, and these pleasure planets are always looking out for rare and beautiful aliens around the galaxy to populate their pleasure houses. And so humans are very much a scarce commodity, very highly regarded, and so they are worth a lot of money. And so basically there is a whole group of baddie aliens who do this sort of like human trafficking, but alien trafficking, and you know, force people, not just women, but all kinds of aliens, all kinds of different creatures into these pleasure houses. Now, Volos is part of this baddie group, and he has knowingly been selling these women, and he has not treated women particularly well in the past. And he's very much a sort of a scarred hero. When we first meet him in book 1, he doesn't even sound like he looks very nice. He's definitely scarred. He's sort of like a cat-like alien, so he's kind of like humanoid but with cattish features. and so he has a tail, and his tail's been, you know, the end of his tail's been cut off. He's got lots of scars. His hair is described as quite limpy, sort of like greasy and unwashed, if you like. Not really been taking care of himself, and he's definitely in a very, very sort of dark place, and he's been doing some bad things. He knows the hero book from book 1 though, so they have this sort of confrontation, and you know, we see him in books 1, 2 and 3 coming and going, and like I say, being very much this villain until book 3, when he is kind of left for dead, and he's forced to work with another kind of hero from one of the other stories to kind of escape where they're at and get out. And almost as payment for this, he decides he's going to turn over a new leaf and do some good in the world. And this is kind of where we then meet Shae, who is the heroine from book 4. She's one of the humans that has been abducted. She is now in a pleasure house, and Volos is her unlikely rescuer. He actually rescues her from one of these places, and she goes with him. But she is not content to just be rescued and taken to safety. Instead, she agrees to go with Volos to bring down like the head of the operation, if you like, to stop any more people from being sort of trafficked in the future. And in doing this, she kind of has to pretend to be with Volos, spend a lot more time with him, as they kind of like try and enact their plan to get revenge and to take this sort of like this kidnapping ring down. And of course they are then in close proximity together, get to know each other a bit better, and ultimately he becomes a better person, and she uncovers, you know, the softer centre within, and we realise that he's actually a good alien after all, and he ultimately deserves his HEA. So despite the fact that he's done some bad things, we definitely forgive him by the end, because he more than makes up for what he's done in his actions with Shae. Then the next one is Savage Duddy by Bianca Cole. This is book 2 in the Boston Mafia Dons series. This one is an Irish mafia romance, and the tropes in this one are kind of the fact that the heroine is a virgin and she sells her virginity at an auction. Now the villain in this one, the villain who becomes a hero in this one, is Malachi. He is head of the Irish mafia in Boston. And we saw him in book 1, and he is not a nice person. He's described very much as very, very unhinged. He is very, very brutal and cruel. He's very, very vicious. He takes no prisoners. And in book 1, he is very much trying to get one over on the head of the Italian mafia in Boston, and ends up stealing or kidnapping the heroine from that one. So basically, Italian mafia boss's wife, he ends up kidnapping her to kind of get revenge on his enemy, but while she's in his captivity, he doesn't treat her particularly well, and also goes so far as to do a bit of torture as well. So of course, when the heroine from book 1 is rescued and they take Malachi down, we think that potentially that is the end of him, and he absolutely deserves everything he gets, and we don't at all like Malachi in book 1. But it's not too long before we get his book, and in book 2 it starts out quite dark, because he intends to buy his heroine, who is Scarlet in this one. He intends to buy Scarlet from this virgin auction. And what he likes to do is to buy virgins and break them, essentially treat them really, really badly, break them, and then set them loose. However, as soon as he buys Scarlet and takes her home, there's something different about her. She's different with him, and he's different with her, and he decides that he maybe doesn't want to break her like he has done with some of the others. And he's still not gentle, he's still not kind, but he isn't as vicious or as horrible as he would be with you know, women in the past, and over time he definitely starts to soften, and we start to find out a bit more about his backstory, why he's done why he did what he did in book 1, and start to understand a little bit more about him. Now, as I always say with Bianca Cole's books, they're not for the faint of heart. There is a lot of non-com, dub-con. Like I said, the heroes are quite vicious, particularly to their women in the early stages of the book. So I would definitely read the trigger warnings before you go into this one. But it's part of kind of why I like it, because even though I'm putting Malachi into this sort of redemption arc recommendation sort of video, he doesn't fully redeem himself. He never 100% becomes a really, really nice guy that's going to treat everyone well. No, he's still head of the Irish Mafia. He's still vicious. He's still got a dark sort of side, like a monster that needs to be fed, if you like. But Scarlett very much tames him, and we understand his motivations and where he's coming from and why he does what he does and why he is the way that he is. And he was definitely my favourite hero from this series as a whole. Yeah, I would highly recommend. Then the next one is Born of Legend by Sherilyn Kenyon, and this is the League book 9. So this is book 9 in the series, so you have to read a lot of books to get to this one. But if you like Sherilyn Kenyon and you've read, and she's probably better known for her Dark Hunter series, if you like that sort of thing and you like Sherilyn Kenyon, though, I'd definitely recommend this series as a whole. Absolutely worth the read, in my opinion. And instead of it being kind of like sort of a paranormal sort of romance, which is sort of more the Dark Hunter series, this is more sort of sci-fi fantasy, I would say. It's set in space, and when I read this one, it very gave me Star Warsy vibes in a way. We have this whole series is based on, you know, lots and lots of planets with lots and lots of different aliens, and they're kind of part of a federation, if you like, you know, so they've kind of like grouped together, a bit like the United Nations or something like that. So all these planets have come together. Of course, the sort of the ruling body, if you like, is actually corrupt, and doesn't always put the planets first, or don't put people first in terms of some of the decisions that they make. And as a result, there is a group of sort of vigilantes, if you like, the rebels, who are trying to bring this sort of corrupted political body down in order to kind of free some of the planets that are under their tyranny. So that's kind of how it's set up. So in some ways it isn't like Star Wars, but it's that kind of like concept of we're spread out vastly in the universe, lots of different galaxies, lots of different planets across the universe, but there's kind of like this united political body. So the hero in this one is Julian, but he has been the villain very much from book 1. We have absolutely despised this person from book 1. And by the time we get to book 9, he is now very much on the run. He's trying to hide, but he's also reinvented himself, and he now goes by the name of Dagger. And he ends up settling on a planet and forming a relationship with Yushara, who becomes his wife. But this is the tale of, it's a very long book. It's like over 700 pages. It's a very long book, but it's a very big tale, and we go back in time almost to sort of the start of book 1 and find out why he was the villain, why he was doing what he was doing, how it had all come to be, what, you know, why he was continuing to show this side of his personality, or this persona that he was this villain, and then over time what he did to get himself out of it. But also by this time it's almost too late, because he is the villain and people are after him, and he just decides that he wants to completely reinvent himself, become a different person, and kind of hide on this planet and live his life. Of course, he's not able to hide. He has to confront his past, he has to confront his demons, he has to address the guilt that he feels for what's going on. And when he gets an opportunity to right some of the wrongs and get onto the right side of the battle, as it were, and to atone for some of his sins and to apologise from some of the earlier characters who he hurt, that's when we really start to see his sort of redemption story. Now for me, this is probably the biggest redemption arc of all of the books that I'm recommending, but it is a massive series. There's 11 books in total. I think she's going to be writing a 12th book at some point, and they are chunky books. So it feels very much like this sort of like sci-fi saga of all of the political intrigue and what's going on in the universe, and some absolutely fantastic characters. There's a really great cast of characters in here. So by the time you get to this book, we, you know, like I say, we have an absolute hatred for this person, But I think Sherilyn Kenyon is absolutely brilliant at turning a villain into a hero, and for us to fully empathise with his position, what he's been through, the situation he's in now, and when he apologises, you absolutely want to accept his apology and let him get his happy ever after. So if you haven't read that series yet and you like sort of a sci-fi sort of fantasy story, or you've read anything of Sherilyn Kenyon's and enjoyed it, then I would absolutely recommend. I think it's absolutely fantastic. So from sci-fi fantasy to Omegaverse, the next one I want to recommend is this one, which is The Alpha's Resurrection by Marlowe Roy. And this is book 3 in the After End Omegaverse series. And in this one we're following Jake and Zora. Now Jake was the villain from book 1, and we've seen him a little bit in book 1 and book 2. This series is like I say, is a Omegaverse, but the concept of this one is that some kind of apocalypse happened to the earth, and there was kind of an end of the world scenario. Now a lot of people didn't survive, but the people that did ended up being changed, and we had alphas, omegas and betas emerging from the rubble of this apocalypse, if you like. And so now they are kind of like surviving after the end, so that's why it's called the After End Omegaverse series. Now in book 1, the hero from book 1 is a man called Hunter, and he was alive before the end, and he lived a normal life, and he was a doctor, and he had a friend called Jake, who's the hero from this book. Now when the end sort of happened, Hunter and Jake were surfing together in the Caribbean, and then Hunter decides he's going to leave the Caribbean to go home to find his family. He doesn't find them, and he ends up moving further north, and eventually he becomes an alpha, but also an old human, so he's kind of long-lived. He's an alpha, and he's one of the alpha of alphas, and he's been leading this sort of alpha pack. He remembers what it was like before the end, and so he is much more open-minded than a lot of other sort of alpha packs that are out there in the world, and he very much looks after his people and the omegas in his community. However, he is, like I say, he's very, very long-lived. He started to become very jaded and cynical about life, and he just wants to end it all. And in that book, he finally meets his heroine, Kes, and he gets his happy ever after. However, during that story, we end up meeting Jake, and Jake by this point has also a human who was long-lived, also become an alpha, but some of the things that happened to him on his journey turned him a little bit crazy, a little bit insane, and in book 1 he ends up kidnapping Kes, and Hunter has to go and save her from Jake. Now Jake isn't in his right mind, and Hunter was friends with him in the past, so he kind of gives him the benefit of the doubt and lets him come and live with him in his sort of his town, his community that he's established. But he basically says to Jake, you can come and live with us, but you can't be one of us, and you cannot speak to an omegas or go anywhere near omega, and I don't trust you with my women. I will help you get you back on your feet though, and you can stay with us for a time. But basically Jake agrees to this so he can live near Hunter, live in this community, and he absolutely agrees that he's not going to go anywhere near another omega. Of course, over time he starts to come to terms with what happened to him. He recovers from what's essentially been a mental breakdown for him, and he starts to sort of come out of it. Now at the start of this book, this is where we meet his heroine, Zora, because she's an omega and she's from a neighbouring town, and she and her parents want her to marry another alpha in her town, but she doesn't want to marry this alpha, and so she persuades her parents to let her go and live in Hunter's community for the summer, to be a nanny for some children that have recently been born, and then she promises that she'll come back and marry this alpha. What she's secretly hoping though is that she'll find her mate in this other community, and therefore she won't have to go back and marry this other guy. Of course what happens is that Jake ends up being her mate, but they can't be together because she's supposed to marry someone else, and he's sworn not to even talk to an omega, let alone mate with them, and so they kind of have this very, very slow burn romance between them as they get to know each other. They have some secret meetings together, and eventually they kind of start their relationship. So What I really love about this one is we really see Jake, you know, we go back into the past, we find out what happened to him after the end happened, why he was the way that he was, why he got to the point where he ended up kidnapping Kes in book 1, and then really what he did to support this community, look after this community, and fall in love with Zora. That really gets his redemption. So the fact that this is called the Alpha's Resurrection, I absolutely agree with that, because he's sort of resurrected from the ashes as a new person, and ultimately gets his happy ever after. So really enjoyed that one and would recommend. So then I've got another very villainous hero, and that is Van from Vanquish by Pam Godwin, and this is book 2 in the Deliver series. And this one we're following Van and his heroine Amber. This is very much a dark romance, so please check your trigger warnings. And we met Van in book 1, which was actually called Deliver, and Van was absolutely not a nice guy at all. So to explain a bit about Van's sort of redemption arc, if you like, we need to explain a bit about what happened in Deliver, which I also highly recommend. I absolutely love that one. And essentially what's happening in this one, it is again based on sex trafficking. Van and Liv, who is the heroine from book 1, they are working together to train people to be sex slaves, and then they get sold into sex slavery. And in book 1, Liv is tasked with kidnapping Josh, who is a young college football player, and trying to train him basically. And Van is very much there. We don't 100% understand the relationship between him and Liv, but Van is very much in love with Liv, or it seemingly is that he's obsessed with Liv, he's in love with Liv, but he's kind of forced her into this relationship where they do have a sexual relationship and they're working together to train these other people into sex slavery. But it comes very clear very quickly that Liv is also a victim, and Van is kind of her captor in a way, who gives her a little bit of free rein, but is definitely holding something over her, and we don't really know what it is. There's quite a big sort of mystery and a lot of kind of shocking reveals that happen in the first book, so I don't want to spoil it too much. But needless to say, Van is definitely a villain in that book, and he does some very, very terrible things. However, his character is also extremely intriguing. We don't really scratch the surface of who he is, what he's about, why he's doing what he's doing, and while some things are revealed and we understand a bit more by the end of the book what his motivations could be, he already starts to redeem himself a little bit, because he is instrumental in helping Liv and Josh kind of escape and get their lives back. But he is still not a good person, and Liv and Josh absolutely still don't trust him at all. And as we move into book 2 and Van gets his own book with Amber, it starts off that maybe he's still up to his old ways, because he is very much stalking Liv. Every night he goes to the house where she now lives with Josh, and he's watching them. He's kind of put cameras up and he's trying to hear what they're saying. There is a house next door that is seemingly unoccupied, and he's been using that as his base camp. Basically, he waits out on the porch of this building to spy on the Liv and Josh's house, which is next door. So he definitely starts this book also seemingly to be up to no good. The thing is, his attention very quickly goes from Liv and Josh to the person living in this house, because it turns out it's not unoccupied at all. In fact, a lady lives there who is called Amber, and Amber has had some trauma in her past, now an agoraphobic, and her fear is so severe that she can't even step 1 foot outside her house. And so she has a job where she mainly works from home, but she very much relies on sending things out and getting things back in via mail. And so she's kind of employed this man to kind of do all her chores for her, bring in her post, take some post away, get her groceries and things like that. Things that she can't do because she can't leave the house. And in return, she gives this person sort of sexual favours, so they maybe come on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and on Tuesday and Thursdays basically she has sex with this person, almost as like part of the payment for doing this thing for her, and it kind of like satisfies her sexual needs as a woman, but also takes away some of her guilt for getting this person to do this. And so Van starts to witness what is going on here, and he starts to figure out what's going on, and he also figures out that she is too scared to leave the house. So she becomes his perfect victim, because he doesn't now even need to tie this woman up in order to keep her captive. All he has to do is put her inside the house and she can't escape. And so he very much becomes fascinated by her, ends up kidnapping her, taking her to his own place where she can't escape. But they ultimately develop this relationship, and they start to help each other, in the sense that Van suddenly has somebody who actually loves him for him. He starts to think and feel differently about some of the things that have happened in his past, and he attempts to seek forgiveness from Liv and Josh. And not only that, but in return he wants to help her, because he realises that she is indeed trapped by her own fear, and little by little he starts to try and help her overcome that fear and starts to force her out of the house. So it's a little bit ironic really, where it is a captive situation, but one of the things he does to her is make her go outside, because he's trying to break down this fear that she has, that she can't go outside. And so I think through their relationship of him really helping her and understanding you know, her struggles and difficulties, she learns more about him and accepts him for who he is. And ultimately they're both kind of very damaged people, but they find happiness in each other and kind of work through some of their difficulties. So I thought the story with Van and Amber was absolutely fantastic. Really loved it, and loved Van as a character. Even though he started out very villainous and is capable of some really horrible things, for me he really demonstrated that you know, people can change if they want to, and he can make himself you know, become a better person. So moving on from very dark romance to something much more light-hearted, and this one is now The Front Runner by Elsie Silver, and this is book 3 in her Gold Rush Ranch series. So it's a small town sort of cowboy romance, and in this book we're following Stefan and Myra. Now Stefan was very much public enemy #1 in books 1 and 2, and he owns a neighbouring horse ranch that isn't the Gold Rush Ranch. He owns a neighbouring one, and his ranch is rivals with Gold Rush Ranch basically, and he has very much been sort of the villain of the story. He's been public enemy #1, like I said, because it seemed like in books 1 and 2 maybe he was doing some dodgy dealings down at the racetrack in order to sabotage some of the Gold Rush Ranch horses and to put his horse in first place. And so he has very antagonistic relationship to the characters from books 1 and 2, and in particular Bobby, the horse trainer, who is the heroine from book 1. But in this story we find out more about Stefan and realise he's not as bad a man as we thought, and he starts a relationship with Myra, who is the vet. Now Myra is the local vet, and she looks after the horses on both ranches, so she has a foot in both camps, if you like. And Stefan has really wanted to start a relationship with Myra for a long time. In fact, he's regularly asked her out on a date and she always says no. And so when a very sad but opportunistic moment takes place, he offers to do a deal with Myra in exchange for her going on some dates with him. And essentially what happens is that he has a horse who gives birth to a foal, but unfortunately the foal dies. And similarly we have on Gold Rush Ranch a horse who has given birth to a foal dies, and the foal is now alive, needing a new mother. So Myra, as the vet, basically sees this opportunity that they can match up this sort of orphaned foal with the horse on Stefan's farm, who has recently lost a foal, and therefore it can be kind of like a surrogate mother for this foal. And like I say, Stefan absolutely agrees to do this. He would have done this anyway. He is actually not a villainous person as we first thought. He's very soft-hearted, and he would absolutely do it, but he can't resist the opportunity to do a deal with Myra, like I said, and say absolutely the foal can come and live here, but in exchange I want you to go on 3 dates with me and give me a chance. And at first this foal is very, very sick, so Mara spends a lot of time at the farm. They spend time overnight in the stables with this horse, making sure that it's okay. And during this kind of like this time when they're caretaking for this horse and making sure that the foal bonds with its kind of surrogate mother, they spend a lot more time together, and she starts to realise that Stefan isn't the bad person that we thought, and we find out things that happened in book 1 and 2 and that maybe none of them are actually Stefan's fault, and actually start to uncover some of his backstory, his motivations, and kind of what makes him tick, and ultimately we definitely have new feelings for Stefan by the end of that book. Next up I have Death Adder by Naomi Lucas, and this is book 4 in the Naga Bride series, and in this one we've got a monster romance, particularly a Naga, so a snake, and this is a hybrid between a Death Adder snake and a human hybrid, and that is our main male character in this one, who is Xalax, and in this one his heroine is Celeste. So imagine the scene, it is Earth, and we are introduced to an alien species called the Lurkers. Now the Lurkers are very different to us, but they possess great technology, and in exchange for sharing some of this technology with us, they ask if they can come and live on Earth with us, and we kind of agree. And so the Lurkers start to share their technology with us. Now we don't know what transpired, but at the start of this series what we believe has happened is that the Lurkers and the humans somehow got into some sort of argument. The Lurkers destroyed the planet Earth, or made it uninhabitable for humans, and fled. We don't know where the Lurkers have gone, we haven't seen them since, but the humans all had to kind of abandon Earth, and they now kind of live on other planets or colony ships in space. And 1500 years has passed where everyone believes that Earth has been completely uninhabitable for all this time, and humans have made their home in the stars. Now, over time, there is a new alien species out there who are very much baddies, but basically this baddie sort of species is coming through the galaxy and destroying kind of, you know, whole planets and killing loads of people, and they seemingly are unstoppable. So the humans have basically sent a mission back to Earth to try and retrieve some of the technology and the weapons that they've left behind from when they fled. So this is what kind of starts off in book 1. When we go back to Earth, there is a small kind of investigatory team who lands on Earth and starts to try and find some of this old technology, and of course what they meet there is the Nagas, who are now the new inhabitants of this planet. Now, throughout this series up to date, we have believed that Xalax is very much the villain in the story. He is a Death Adder. Now, Death Adders have got a really, really bad rap with all the other snakes, and so far we have had a Viper, a King Cobra and a Blue Coral Snake, and they all absolutely believe that the Death Adders are the worst possible snakes. They are evil, they're rapists, they are murderers, they're violent and cannot be reasoned with, and everybody stays away from the Death Adders. In fact, they've been hunted to pretty much extinction, and there's not many Death Adders left, but Xalax is one of them. And Xalax is also a scarred hero. We've seen him before. When we have encountered him, he's described very much as being very, very scarred. Clearly been in a lot of battles, a lot of fights. He has had to ward off not only a lot of attackers, but has been very much the aggressor towards some other people, and he's also missing one of his eyes. And so he, like I say, he is described very much as, you know, a very fearsome, vicious sort of snake with lots of scarring. And that's kind of who we believe this Death Adder is, who this Xalax is. However, we learn that that's not who he actually is, and yes, some other Death Adders have done stuff that's been bad in the past, but Xalax has not been one of them. In fact, he has been trying to redeem for some of the things that they've done, and is one of the reasons why the Death Adders have almost been becoming extinct, because he's been one of the ones that have been hunting them all down. Now, lots of stuff's gone down in books 1, 2 and 3 to the point where everybody who came from the first mission is now dead, missing, or nesting with a snake. And so the humans decide they're going to send a kind of battalion down, if you like, a team of soldiers to try and find out what's happened to the party that's disappeared, and either rescue them if they're kind of like trapped or something, or kind of report back and let command know kind of what's going on. And the leader of this particular soldier group is Celeste, so she's kind of like the captain of this, or the commander of this group. And when she lands in the forest, they kind of split up to go and find the original ship, and this other place that they're trying to get to. And of course Xanax is there, and he starts to kind of stalk them, and they know a snake is stalking them, and they kind of have a couple of interactions with him, but ultimately the team split off. One team goes completely missing, the other team pretty much gets annihilated by other animals that are in the forest, and all that's left is Celeste, one other soldier, and Xanax. And Xanax basically agrees that he's going to help Celeste find her missing men, and get them back to the ship to safety. And during this sort of like during their time together, Xanax actually gets severely injured defending her, and therefore she refuses to leave him alone, and she nurses him back to health with the help of another snake who appears, and he constantly is in bewilderment why she is spending so much time trying to heal the Death Adder, because he's like, why are you doing this? As soon as he wakes up, he's going to kill everyone. He's very, very vicious. He's going to kidnap you and rape you. You don't want to be around him. Are you sure you want to be with this person? And she very much says, yes, I do. He's only ever helped me. He's not hurt me. I don't believe it'll hurt me. And I think you're maybe being unfair to him. And when he eventually kind of recovers from his injuries, and they're together, he cannot believe that she's defended him, stuck up for him, and would want to be with him because of this bad reputation that he's got. And he's very, very kind of lonely kind of snake, and is absolutely not only obsessed with Celeste, but absolutely feels undeserving and cannot believe that someone like her would want to be with somebody like him. And so I absolutely love this story. I was highly anticipated from the first moment I saw Xanax in book 1. I wanted to read this story because I love a redemption arc, I love a villain, and this story really didn't disappoint. I really thoroughly enjoyed it and would highly recommend. And then the last one I want to recommend today is Under the Radar by Melanie Moreland, and this is book 4 in the Reynolds Restoration series. It's a small town romance, and in this one we're following Chase and Hannah. Now this is somebody who has definitely had their redemption arc, but I don't think he was ever really a bad person. He was just, you know, he just did some questionable things. So let me explain. So in book 1 of Reynolds Restoration series, we follow Max and Charlie, and Max owns his own mechanic in garage, and they specialise in repairing cars, but also motorbikes and restoring old motorbikes. And in book 1 there were 2 antagonists in the town, Wes and Chase. So Wes and Chase were brothers. Wes was the oldest brother and Chase was his younger brother, and they, you know, were the terrors of the town. Their father was really, really rich. They thought they owned everyone and could have everything. Particularly Wes was very, very narcissistic, very egotistical. And when he propositioned Charlie when she first came to town and she declined, he got very angry about this and decided to seek revenge. And Chase happened to be with Wes, his brother, when they were driving past Charlie, who was on her bike, and they decided to have a bit of fun with her. And eventually they knocked her off her bike and she fell into a ditch, but they drove off and left her without turning back to see if she was okay. As it was, Charlie was severely injured and ended up Max having to rescue her and take her to hospital and stuff. And Chase was obviously there when it happened and was part of this incident. Now, he felt very guilty for what happened, and he goes to the police, turns himself in, admits what he's done, but also then kind of snitches on his brother and says that Wes was also involved, then tells them and gives them evidence of all some other stuff that Wes has been doing around town. As a result, both Chase and Wes goes to prison, but Chase gets a reduced sentence because he was the one that handed himself in and obviously gave evidence against his brother. And he also got out released early for good behaviour. Now, unfortunately, Wesley's older brother ended up dying in prison, and a year later his father also dies, leaving him completely on his own. And also, by this point, his brother had stopped speaking to him and his dad had stopped speaking to him. So he's now completely, you know, without any family, and he has got a very bad reputation in town because of his surname and what he's done. So even though he's now out of prison, he's still very much thought badly of in the town. However, he's inherited a lot of money from his dad, because remember I said his dad was quite rich, but he won't touch any of the money. He thinks it's sort of blood money in a way, and he doesn't deserve to have it, so he doesn't touch anything personally. But he does do a lot for charity and gives away a lot of charitable stuff, and gives away a lot to the town. But also, shortly after coming out of prison, he decides to go and see Charlie and Max and apologise for what he's done. And Max is very distrusting at first, but Charlie welcomes him with open arms, forgives him for what he's done, and even helps him get back on his feet by offering him a place to stay and giving him a job as a bit of a gopher at the garage, Reynolds Restorations. And so he, over the course of books, sort of at the end of book 1 and through books 2 and 3, we start to see a bit more of Chase, and he starts to become much more part of this family. So in book 4, we've very much been waiting for his book, and he gets his own HEA. He doesn't think he deserves to be with someone, but in an incident that takes place in book 3, he happens to get drunk one night, and a police officer, Hannah Gallagher, happens to be the one that comes across him while he's drunk. But instead of giving him a ticket, taking him to the sort of the drunk tank, taking him back to the station, she talks to him, finds out who his friend is, and they ring Brett, who's the hero from book 3, comes to collect him. But meanwhile, Chase is obviously a little bit drunk and flirting with Hannah, and he ends up calling her Ossifer Cinnamon, because obviously he's drunk, so he means to say officer, but it comes out Ossifer, and Cinnamon because she's got lots of freckles on her face, and so that's becomes his nickname for her. Then at the start of book 4, essentially the scenario is that Chase and Brett were living together, but now Brett is, you know, happily partnered off with the heroine from book 3. Chase is now looking for a roommate, and he puts an ad up in the paper for a new roommate. Hannah sees it because she's a new police officer in town and she needs a place to stay. So she ends up becoming Chase's roommate, and then when he finds out the landlord is going to sell the house, he ends up buying the house from the landlord, so she becomes, you know, still his roommate. So she's still his roommate, but basically he now owns a house, and so together they start to do the house up and start to renovate it and repair the roof and do the decking and do some stuff to the garden and do some painting inside and everything. And so I thought this was a really, really sweet, super sweet romance, small town romance. It's about family, and it's just basically showing how Chase has completely reformed his life, completely reformed his character. He's found a new family and he gets his happy ever after, and it's just really, really sweet how this story unfolds. So there we go, some highs and some lows, some really, really dark romances there, but some more light-hearted, fun sort of redemption stories. I hope you find that useful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Remember to comment in the comments down below if you've got any recommendations for me. And thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Max and Charlie. So in book 1, we were following Max and Charlie, and called the, I want to say the Kelak, but I'm not 100% sure that is what they're called. We can take care of the foal and pair it with the mother horse. And Amber is what do you call it when you don't want to leave the house? Sorry about that. Battery change. Is that a bit of my hair going to be annoying you through that whole video? Probably. And in book 1, in Deliver, Liv is tasked with finding, right. And book 1 is all about Liv And in book 1, Liv is tasked with kidnapping Josh. In book 1, book 1,